The first time I saw her, she had a clipboard in one hand, a permanent scowl on her face, and a poodle in a rhinestone sweater yapping at my truck tires. That was Margaret Templeton, head of the Twin Pines HOA and self-declared queen of suburban order. And unfortunately for me, my ranch backed right up to her precious gated community. I'm Tucker Kalman. I run a 5-acre horse ranch that's been in my family since before the HOA even existed. Twin Pines was built 10 years ago, but lately their board, especially Margaret, had been acting like they owned everything within a mile radius. Last week, I caught her staring through the mesh fencing at my property with binoculars. She called out, "You know, Tucker, that pile of lumber by your fence is an eyesore. The HOA has standards." I leaned on my shovel, stared back, and said, "Well, good thing I'm not part of your HOA." She didn't like that. Not one bit. She stormed off in her orthopedic wedges, muttering about visual pollution and community harmony. I figured she'd grumble for a few days and move on. But Margaret doesn't move on. She escalates. 3 mornings later, I found 2 busted trash bags dumped right across my ranch road, the gravel path that leads from the public road to my stables. Coffee grounds, half-eaten sandwiches, and what I really hope wasn't a used diaper were smeared across my property. Now, I've got trail cams on every post, mostly for coyotes and trespassers. I checked the footage. There she was, Margaret herself, in her HOA-branded windbreaker, dragging 2 black trash bags behind her like some deranged raccoon. She looked right at my camera and flipped it off. I was furious. But I'm not the yelling type. I'm the planning type. So I waited. That weekend, I made a few calls. Farmer down the road owed me a favor and had just cleaned out his cattle barn. I had him bring over 2 truckloads of fresh, wet manure. The real potent stuff. At dawn Monday morning, I drove over to Twin Pines and dumped it all, every last shovel, right in front of Margaret Templeton's pristine white gate. Blocked it entirely. By noon, she was outside screaming at the pile like it had insulted her ancestors. I parked my truck across the road and leaned on the hood. "You know, Margaret," I called, "the smell of justice is strong today." She spun around, red-faced. "You childish filthy, this is harassment. You're going to regret this." I shrugged. "Oh no, Margaret. I'm just returning your trash. Thought you'd like a little something from my side too." Her poodle barked like it was about to faint. She pulled out her phone and started shouting about calling the sheriff. I smiled and waved. I'd already called them myself with proof of her trespassing and illegal dumping in hand. And I knew exactly when Deputy Morales would show up. Deputy Morales pulled up in his county cruiser right on schedule, tires crunching across the shoulder. He took his time, stepping out tall, calm, and with a mustache that looked like it hadn't budged since the 70s. He nodded at me, then turned to face the steaming pile of fertilizer barricading the HOA gate. Margaret stormed toward him, gesturing wildly at the mound and then at me like she was conducting an orchestra made entirely of rage. "Officer, that man is endangering public safety, blocking emergency access. You need to arrest him immediately." Morales adjusted his sunglasses and gave her a slow, almost bored look. "This private gate here? The one that opens to a private road within your private subdivision?" "Yes," she snapped, clearly expecting that to support her case. "Aha," he said, then turned toward me. "You got footage?" I handed over the flash drive. Trail cam caught her dragging garbage onto my land. Bags split open. There's food waste, broken glass, even a syringe. Margaret's face twitched. "That's preposterous. He's fabricating evidence." I would never. Morales held up a hand. "Ma'am, please. I'll review the footage. If it shows what he says, that's illegal dumping. Not to mention trespassing." She blinked. "But he blocked our gate." He nodded, slow and deliberate. "And you dumped trash on his property. So depending on what the footage shows, we might be looking at criminal mischief, health code violations, and potentially a civil claim if any of his animals or land were harmed." He turned back to me. "You said there was a syringe?" "Yep. Found it stuck in the gravel near the stable path." "Got photos?" Margaret's mouth opened and closed without sound. Morales took the flash drive, then motioned back to his cruiser. I'll be back after reviewing this. Both of you stay put. While he sat in his car, AC humming, Margaret paced like a caged animal. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching her. She kept glancing at me like I was a puzzle with a missing piece she couldn't find. I don't understand, she muttered, more to herself than anyone. We send notices, we maintain standards. Why would you resist something so basic as cleanliness? I raised an eyebrow. You dumped trash on my driveway. It was symbolic, she snapped, then immediately regretted it. Her eyes darted to Morales' cruiser. I mean, it was a protest, a statement against rural blight infringing on our community aesthetic. You know what else is symbolic? I said. That pile of fertilizer. It represents every ounce of your hypocrisy. She turned away, grinding her teeth. 15 minutes later, Morales stepped out of his cruiser, expression unreadable. He strode back over and handed me the flash drive. Footage is clear. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. Her jaw dropped. You're arresting me. This is outrageous. I'm the HOA president. He shrugged. And I'm a deputy enforcing county law. Cuffs or no cuffs, it's your call. She blustered, trying to talk over him, but eventually she slumped, muttering under her breath as she followed him to the car. The poodle barked from behind the gate, confused and alone. As they drove off, I took a deep breath and looked out over the quiet scene. I didn't feel triumphant, not yet. Margaret was the face of the HOA, but I had a feeling the rot went deeper. Later that evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice came through, low and cautious. You don't know me, but I'm on the HOA board. Name's Alan. I saw what happened this morning. I said nothing, waiting. I've been trying to push back against Margaret for months. She's been using HOA funds, improperly ordered a decorative fountain for her yard using community dues. She hides the invoices under landscaping maintenance. I've got copies. Now that got my attention. And why are you telling me this? Because she's not just targeting you. She's been fining widows for having wind chimes, threatened to tow a disabled veteran's van because it lowered property values. This might be your first run-in, but for the rest of us, it's been years. I nodded slowly. You got proof. Every document, every vote. She even manipulated the last board election, changed the meeting location last minute so no one would show. I've got the email timestamps. I jotted down his number. We'll need more than documents. We need people willing to talk. I've got names, but they're scared. Let me handle that, I said. You just gather everything you've got. We're going to shine a floodlight on this little HOA kingdom. The next day, I drove into town and met with an old friend of mine, Carla Jensen, former city council member turned paralegal. She'd helped draft zoning regulations back when Twin Pines was first approved. If anyone knew the legal limits of what an HOA could and couldn't touch, it was her. I laid everything out for her. The footage, the phone call, the trash, the fake fines. She listened without interrupting, then leaned back with a tired sigh. Tucker, most of these HOAs count on people folding. Threatening letters, small fines, it's all scare tactics. But if you can prove misuse of funds, election tampering, and coordinated harassment, that's racketeering. At the very least, fraud. And if we go public? She smiled. Then you're not just fighting back, you're exposing a whole system. Over the next week, I turned my barn office into a war room. Alan brought over boxes, literal boxes of receipts, meeting records, and internal emails. I scanned and indexed everything. Carla combed through the bylaws. We found gold. Margaret had charged over $20,000 to the HOA for security enhancements, but the invoices were from her nephew's company, a business that didn't even exist in the state registry. She'd also pushed through a bylaw amendment that required any homeowner renovations to be approved by a special aesthetic committee, which she chaired. No one else had ever seen the amendment before it passed. We traced dozens of fines, all issued to board dissenters or residents who'd questioned her decisions. One woman had been charged $300 for having unauthorized garden gnomes. Another got hit with a $50 fine every week for a flagpole that had stood since her husband's funeral. It wasn't just abuse of power, it was targeted, organized exploitation. Alan set up a meeting with a few of the other board members, those who'd been sidelined or strong-armed into silence. They met me at the local library after hours, in the basement conference room behind the community bulletin board. I expected 5 or 6. 14 showed up. Some were retirees, others younger families. One man brought photocopies of threats Margaret had slipped into his mailbox and signed, but typed in the same font as the HOA notices. A woman brought a photo of her front yard before and after Margaret sent landscapers to correct the visual inconsistency. They'd torn out her native pollinator garden without permission. By the end of the meeting, we had a name for ourselves, the Restoration Committee. Our goal was simple: dissolve the current board, audit the books, and file a civil suit if warranted. We'd follow the rules, but we'd use every inch of them. Carla helped us draft a legal petition to call a special election. According to the HOA's own bylaws, if 30% of homeowners demanded it, a vote had to be held within 30 days. We aimed for 60. We needed signatures, proof, faces. That's when I got creative. I rigged up a mobile display on the side of my trailer, one of those fold-out panels usually used for horse show schedules. But instead of event times, I posted laminated photos of Margaret's trash dump, the fake invoices, and the fine notices. Then I parked it just outside the Twin Pines entrance. By noon the next day, a crowd had gathered. Word spread fast. And by evening, I got a text from Alan. She's back. And she's furious. Margaret Templeton stood at the edge of the crowd, her blazer damp under the armpits, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. Her eyes darted between the trailer display and the neighbors gathered around it, whispering, pointing, murmuring in tones that were no longer deferential. She stepped forward, pushing past a man holding his toddler. "This is defamation," she barked. "You're allowing unauthorized signage on private property." A voice cut through, dry and unimpressed. "This is a public easement. It's county land, not yours." It was Carla, standing beside the display board with a clipboard and a legal folder tucked under one arm. She didn't even look up as she flipped a page. Margaret's jaw twitched. "You're spreading lies. None of these documents have been verified. This is a smear campaign." Carla finally looked up. "The county clerk verified them last night. Every invoice, every budget discrepancy, every vote record. We cross-referenced with your HOA's own meeting minutes. Want to see the comparison charts?" Margaret's gaze narrowed. "You think you're clever, but this kind of stunt will backfire." A man from the crowd, mid-50s in a mechanic's jumpsuit, stepped forward. "You fined me $300 for parking my work truck in my own driveway. Said it was commercial clutter. That stunt." Another woman chimed in. "You told me my porch swing was a safety hazard because it wasn't architecturally compatible. I got a citation the same month I missed a payment on dues." Margaret turned, her voice rising. "You all agreed to the rules when you moved in. I've simply upheld the standards this community depends on. Standards don't include funneling dues into your nephew's non-existent security firm," Carla said evenly, "or falsifying amendments without quorum." Margaret's face flushed a deep, mottled red. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a white SUV pulled up. The logo on the door read County Auditor's Office. 2 men stepped out, one carrying a leather briefcase, the other holding a rolled set of documents. They walked directly to Carla. "Ms. Jensen?" the taller one asked. "That's me. We received your packet yesterday. You weren't exaggerating. We've opened a formal investigation into the HOA's financial practices. We'll be reviewing their accounts and contacting residents for statements." Margaret took a step forward, her voice brittle. "You have no jurisdiction over a private association's internal affairs." The shorter auditor turned to her. "Actually, we do. When an HOA collects dues from over 50 residents and handles more than $10,000 annually, it qualifies as a quasi-municipal entity under county code. Embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of funds fall well within our purview. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The taller auditor continued, "We'll be issuing subpoenas for financial records, including bank statements and contractor invoices. If you've nothing to hide, this should be a simple process." Margaret's hands clenched around her purse strap. "This is outrageous. You're taking the word of a rancher over a community leader." Carla didn't miss a beat. "We're taking the word of over 40 residents and 22 signed affidavits." The crowd murmured again, this time louder. Someone began passing around a new sign-up sheet. Back at the ranch that evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Alan and Carla sorting through the last batch of scanned documents. The air smelled like coffee and printer ink. My dog, Brisket, lay under the table, tail thumping lazily. Alan tapped a highlighted section. "Here, this is the key. She authorized a $15,000 landscaping project last spring, labeled it as HOA Perimeter Beautification. But the contractor address leads to a P.O. box in another state. No phone number, no website." Carla leaned in. "And that's the same quarter she raised dues without a community vote." I nodded. "We can cross-reference that timeline with the complaints. See who got fined right after." Alan glanced up. "You sure you're ready for what comes next?" "If this goes to court, it won't be quiet." I leaned back, folding my arms. She made it loud when she started dumping trash and digging into people's lives. "I'm not backing off now." The phone rang. I answered on speaker. "This is Deputy Morales. Just giving you a heads up. We've been coordinating with the auditor's office. They've referred parts of this to the district attorney." Carla leaned forward. "Which parts?" "There are forged documents in the HOA filings, fake vendor contracts, falsified vote tallies. That's felony territory. DA's office is opening a case." Alan exhaled. "It's going criminal?" "Looks that way. And there's more. Turns out the HOA's been collecting fines and dues into 2 separate accounts. One official, one personal. Traced the personal one to Templeton's name." Carla nodded grimly. "That's theft and fraud. At scale." Morales hesitated. "And there's something else, Tucker? We ran the plates on a white panel van that's been seen circling the ranch a few nights this week. Belongs to Templeton's nephew, same one listed on the fake security invoices." I straightened. "What the hell was he doing near my property?" "We're not sure, but I've got a patrol car swinging by your place every hour starting tonight. Just in case." After the call ended, Carla stood and started packing up. "We need to prep residents for testimony. If this goes to trial, the DA will need every voice they can get." Alan added, "And we need to push the vote. If we hold the special election before the trial, we can replace the board and freeze the accounts." I called a community meeting for Saturday. Not in the HOA clubhouse, it was too tainted. We used the county fairgrounds instead. Big, neutral, and impossible for Margaret to control. Over 100 people showed up. Carla stood at the podium first, laying out the facts with projected slides, the duplicate accounts, the fake vendors, the fraudulent votes. Then Alan stepped up and read a prepared statement from a veteran who couldn't attend. The man had been fined repeatedly for flying his service flag at half-mast after losing his brother in Afghanistan. Then it was my turn. I didn't use notes. I just told them what had happened, from the trash on the road to the manure at the gate. I told them how I'd grown up on that land, and how I'd never seen a community eat itself from the inside the way theirs had under Margaret. By the time I finished, you could have heard a pin drop. I raised the petition, now with over 70% of homeowners signed on. We have the numbers, we have the law, and now we have each other. Applause broke out, not polite or hesitant. It was the sound of people reclaiming something they didn't realize they'd lost. Their say. The vote happened 10 days later. Margaret tried to stop it with a cease and desist, but the county judge tossed it out in under an hour. Said her legal standing was non-existent and her claims baseless. The turnout was overwhelming. 91% of homeowners voted. The result? A complete board overhaul. Margaret refused to step down. She locked herself inside the HOA office for 4 hours until sheriff deputies escorted her out. She was arrested the following week when the DA charged her with 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. The new board froze all HOA accounts and hired an independent auditor. They also issued formal apologies to every resident who'd been fined without cause and refunded the money. They asked me to consult on drafting new bylaws. I said no, but I did agree to build a new fence between my ranch and Twin Pines. Not to divide us, but to mark the line that should never have been crossed in the first place. As I finished the last post, Alan walked up with a cold lemonade. Hard to believe we're finally on the other side. I took the drink. Yeah, but we didn't just beat her. We fixed what she broke. He nodded. And you did it without ever raising your voice. I looked out over the neighborhood, quiet now, except for the sound of kids playing and a wind chime that someone had finally rehung on their porch. I didn't need to, I said. All I had to do was shine a light. And for the first time in years, Twin Pines felt like a community again. Not because someone told them how to behave, but because they chose to stand together when it counted. 2 months passed. The last of Margaret Templeton's influence had withered like an unwanted weed pulled up by the roots. Her trial was fast-tracked thanks to the weight of evidence and the community's urgency to move forward. The courthouse overflowed the day of her arraignment. The gallery wasn't just full, it was standing room only. Most came not out of spite, but for closure. For years, Margaret had ruled with a clipboard and a vendetta. Now, her reckoning had a case number. I sat near the back, beside Carla and Alan, behind a row of residents wearing pale green ribbons pinned to their shirts. It was Alan's idea. Something quiet, he'd said. We'll show unity without theatrics. The judge, a lean woman with sharp eyes and a clipped voice, moved through the charges with surgical precision. Wire fraud, embezzlement, criminal conspiracy. The courtroom air turned thick when the judge read the final count, felony coercion. That one surprised even Carla. Carla leaned closer. That's rare in HOA cases. They almost never get hit with coercion. I kept my eyes on the defense table. Guess they don't usually threaten to revoke people's homes over garden gnomes. The prosecution brought forward a rotating cast of residents. Each one testified with a calm restraint that made their stories hit harder. One woman, a retired nurse, recounted how Margaret had threatened to report her for unauthorized caregiving simply because her terminally ill sister came to stay for a few months. Another, a high school teacher, testified that Margaret had fined her for excessive pedestrian activity when her students came by to drop off class projects. But it was the testimony of Peter Delgado, the Army vet with the service flag, that shifted the mood from quiet outrage to something colder. He stood in full uniform, medals on his chest, and told the court how Margaret had threatened to place a lien on his house if he didn't remove the flagpole his late brother helped him install. She told me it was visually aggressive, Peter said, his voice steady but raw. Said it disrupted the tranquility of the cul-de-sac. That flag's been with me through 3 tours. My brother never came home, but she wanted it gone. No one made a sound. Not even the bailiff shifted. The judge paused before speaking, her voice low. Noted for the record, Margaret never spoke during trial. Her lawyer tried to pass her actions off as administrative overreach, but the financial records made that laughable. She'd siphoned over $80,000 into shell accounts and had used HOA funds to pay for private spa weekends, personal security cameras, and, most bizarrely, a commissioned oil portrait of herself that hung briefly in the HOA clubhouse before someone tore it down and burned it in a backyard fire pit. The guilty verdict came in under 3 hours. Carla closed her notebook. Shortest deliberation I've seen in years. Alan didn't smile. He just nodded once. She thought she was untouchable. The sentence was handed down the following week. 6 years in state prison, mandatory restitution to the HOA, and a permanent ban from holding any administrative role within a community governance board. That last part came from a rarely enforced state statute Carla pulled from the archives. She'll never touch another HOA, Carla said as she filed the final paperwork. She's done. I thought that would be the end of it. But there was still one last echo. Late one evening, I got a knock at the ranch door. The sun was already down and the porch light buzzed faintly. I opened it to find a man in a dark windbreaker with a badge clipped to his belt. Not a deputy. Federal. Mr. Kalman? He asked. Yeah. Agent Royce. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Mind if I come in? Inside, he set a folder on the dining table. We've been reviewing the financial trail attached to your HOA president. Some of the funds she transferred ended up in accounts linked to tax shelters in Nevada and Arizona. We're building a parallel case. I leaned back in my chair. You're telling me the HOA mess triggered a federal tax fraud investigation? He nodded. She wasn't just taking HOA money. She was laundering it. I let that sink in. Why? Best guess? She was prepping to run. The accounts were structured to allow fast withdrawals and offshore transfers. If your community hadn't acted when it did, she might have disappeared with everything in a matter of weeks. He left a business card and a subpoena request form in case we found any more documents. As he left, Brisket barked from the back room, a low, lazy bark that faded as the door clicked shut. Over the next few weeks, the Restoration Committee evolved into the Twin Pines Civic Council. They opened all HOA meetings to the public, posted agendas online, and elected rotating chairs to prevent power hoarding. Alan was voted interim treasurer. Carla, after some coaxing, agreed to serve as legal advisor pro bono. I stayed out of it. I'd done my part. One morning, as I was fixing a fence post near the property line, a small group of Twin Pines kids wandered up carrying lemonade in a plastic pitcher. One of them, a boy maybe 8 or 9, handed me a cup and said, "My mom says you're the reason our flag's back up." I sipped the lemonade. It was warm and too sweet, but I drank the whole thing. You tell your mom she did her part too. They left a handmade card stuck to the fence. Crayon drawings of horses and a smiling sun. Above the sun were the words, "Thanks, Mr. Kalman." I pinned it to the inside of my barn office next to the trail cam photo of Margaret hauling trash across my gravel road. A reminder of where it started. And where it ended. Months passed. The manure was long gone, but the echoes of everything it represented still lingered in the neighborhood. Not as bitterness, but as resolve. Twin Pines had become something it hadn't been in years, a community that watched out for each other, not watched over each other. And as for me, I went back to my quiet mornings, early feedings, and the slow, steady rhythm of ranch life. But I did add one new sign to the gate: no HOA beyond this point. Trespassers will be fertilized.